Welcome back, everybody, to the Fantasy Football Toolkit at fantasyfootballtoolkit.com and broadcast not live at 360sportsnetwork.com. I am the Lost Cause coming to you again after highs and lows this past fantasy football week. And joining me, as always, for another round of sound is Greg the Mad Scientist Bashero. How's it going, Greg?
I'm having more fun than a barrel of monkeys out here. It's a lot of fun. So things are going well.
Good. How's your fantasy team looking?
Well, I'm in the playoffs. I am in first place, and I'm playing the 8th seed right now in week number 14.
So and what kind of a line there? About 70 to 120, or?
We're looking at a projected score of 151 to 140.
Oof.
This was a guy that beat me in week 1.
Well, hopefully you'll lose this week. Anyway. Anyway, let's talk a little fantasy football, some sits, some starts, some studs, some duds, some keepers, some sleepers, and some really, really deep and dredged darkness that we call our deepers. Let me ask you a question. Around the league, a couple guys that are, I can't say consistent because of injury and also because that they're on a three-headed giant kind of a team. But one question that I am getting a lot of, especially because AP might be back this week but might not, is should somebody take the chance of starting Toby Gerhart or Dexter McCluster? McCluster is going to be at the Jets, and Gerhart is at Detroit, and AP's return is still 50-50.
I would actually feel more comfortable with Dexter McCluster, only because he has been getting consistent, not a whole lot, but he has been getting some consistent yardage. Let's put it that way. Whereas Toby Gerhart, that whole Minnesota offense without Adrian Peterson is horribly inconsistent. And with that said, it all comes down to points, and if it's between those two players that you're considering, chances are you're not in the playoffs. So, with that said, I'd probably go with McCluster.
Well, you could be looking deeper. You could have also handcuffed yourself with Gerhart. You don't gotta play down the loser sledge to everybody that is considering these two players. At the same time, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's like you're not really picking who the better of them are. You're picking who has the least potential,
right,
going into this week. McCluster, it's a three-headed giant right there, though. I mean, looking at it, Thomas Jones this week might have a solid week against the Jets. McCluster catches, though. Toby Gerhart, if AP doesn't play, they're going to be playing at Detroit. I'm leaning towards Gerhart if AP isn't playing. But if you can't take the chance, if you got to make the start and your team gets locked, Thursday afternoon before the first game, I would just stick with McCluster. At least McCluster's average is anywhere from 4 to 7 points. Last week he had a real nice week, both in the air and on the ground. Toby Gerhart over the last couple of weeks has scored more than 10 fantasy points with 1 touchdown 2 weeks ago at Atlanta. But at the same time, I mean, you're taking a chance with AB playing. And Minnesota has shown that even if somebody's hurt, they're going to play them to the very last week. Okay, how do you feel about this is for a Flex 1 play in a PPR league, so keep this in mind. Malcolm Floyd against the Buffalo Bills, which is a craptastic kind of defense, or Marion Barber at Denver against a more solid defense, but at the same time, this is a starting running back in the Chicago Bears offense.
I like Marion Barber an awful lot, and I'll tell you why. Forte is not coming back just yet. Fortunately, Forte's injuries were not as serious as what was initially feared. They're saying he's going to be out 2 to 3 weeks, but in fantasy football playoffs, well, he's pretty much done for your season. Marion Barber scores touchdowns. And last time I checked, the touchdowns were 6 points. So, with that said, I would feel very comfortable with Marion Barber because he is going to be taking on the lion's share of work for the Chicago Bears in rushing, and he'll get you some points.
Well, even with the game last night, Malcolm Floyd, his ownership levels only went up to about 57%. Marion Barber on the news of Matt Forte's unfortunate injury, and like you said, I mean, 2 to 3 weeks at this point these are the last 3 weeks of most leagues. Week 15 and Week 16 are usually championship game weeks. Marion Barber is also a receiving threat in that backfield. Right. So I think the same way. Marion Barber is the more solid play. Okay, you have to pick two. C.J. Spiller, 80-plus yards and a touchdown this weekend. Ryan Matthews, 100-plus on the ground and a touchdown. Roy Helu, who Shanahan didn't look for anybody else to rush this last game. Spiller is going to be at San Diego. Ryan Matthews faces off against Buffalo, and Helu is going to be playing against another craptastic kind of a defense in New England.
I feel comfortable with C.J. Spiller, only because he is slowly coming around. I feel, that he'll get you some points. And Matthews, let's put it this way. The Chargers still have a chance to make the playoffs. They are rallying around the mere fact that they think that they can do this. They beat a pretty good defense with Jacksonville. I would say Matthews stays healthy and will get you some points because in order to win, you got to be able to rush the ball. So, I would go Matthews and C.J. Spiller.
I think I'm actually going to take Spiller in this situation. And once again, Buffalo, Stevie Johnson, he's going to slowly get more and more Chandler. It's probably going to be the same way. I think Spiller is going to be a solid pick, especially me personally with Ryan Matthews. I have a problem with Tolbert being in the backfield with him, and I also have a problem with Rivers. When Rivers plays awesome, the running game is actually really solid. If Rivers is a little bit off, the running game's a little bit off. Or it could be something like an osmosis type of deal where if the running game's off, that forces Rivers to be off too. I just don't like that up and down that I feel with Ryan Matthews. And sometimes you see it in the stats too. Helu is the same way. I mean, you could make a great argument that Helu really is an up and down kind of running back. Now that he's the primary back, 23 attempts, 108 yards against Seattle with a touchdown. Against the Jets, 23 attempts, 100 yards, and a touchdown. No other running backs back there with him. I think against New England is probably going to do the same thing. So I'm going Spiller and Helu for the next week, maybe even the next 2 weeks.
See, I disagree with you on the Helu situation, only because New England's a very difficult defense to get a pulse on. Their corners are non-existent. They make Pittsburgh's corners look stellar. But on the same token, some teams have been able to run on them, but there are other teams that have not been able to run on New England. And Washington's offense is kind of unidimensional at this point, very one-dimensional. So with that said, I don't really feel comfortable with Helu only because he is pretty much the only thing that they've got going for them at this time frame, since their tight end is gone, the pot.
You had to throw that one in, huh?
Well, yeah, I did, but so that's why I'm staying away from Helu, and actually, and I think the game that San Diego had was the breakout game that they needed to actually get the confidence in themselves. And the San Diego team is a very emotional team. I mean, you take a look from their leader all the way down. Once these guys get in gear, and this was a game on Monday night that got everybody in gear, I really believe that Matthews is going to have a really fantastic 2 to 3 weeks. So that's why I'm going more toward Matthews on this particular thing, more than anything else. So
I think if anything, it's going to be more solid play at wide receiver than it is at running back for that team right now. I'm just saying that's and that's a feeling. That's not statistical. That's just a big feeling right there. Yeah. More fantasy value in weeks 14, 15, and 16. Now, these are running backs that are like barely owned. In fact, when I said one of these players' names, I could tell that anybody that listened to the podcast, their jaw dropped. They looked on 2 sites to make sure that this person is actually in the NFL. So the first one, everybody knows, Ricky Williams from Baltimore. The next 3 weeks, They're going to be hosting Indianapolis. They're going to be making their way to San Diego, and then they're going to be hosting Cleveland, which looks like really good spots for him to pick and choose, especially after this last game against Cleveland. 16 carries for 76 yards and a touchdown. That's pretty sweet, but earlier didn't have so much going on. The name that I like, and this running back I am in love with just for his potential, if not this season. If you are in a keeper league, run out today and pick him up. Love him. And I don't mean love him like just hug him. I mean love him like pinch his nipples. Love him. Brandon Sane from Green Bay. He's going to be playing against Oakland, at Kansas City, and then against Chicago. Chicago's going to be a bad game for him. Maybe. But I think out of those two, there's a lot of fantasy value between those two. Ricky Williams against Indianapolis, that's going to be some crazy amount of points for everybody on Baltimore's offense. As long as Flacco can get it running, Ray Rice is always going to get you points, but the passing's got to be there to help get Ricky Williams involved with the play. You saw that in Cleveland. It should happen in Indianapolis and Cleveland. That being said, Brandon Sane falls into a place where even though he only had, a little bit over a dozen yards rushing, he also had pretty close to 30 yards receiving last week. He's in an offense that can outscore every other one in the NFL right now. And he's going to be playing against Oakland. He's going to be playing at Kansas City. Chicago's going to be the bad matchup, but 2 out of 3, I think there's more potential in Sane for having hard-driven, almost a dozen fantasy points in these next 3 weeks.
Wow. I would probably say the fantasy value, I agree with you on Brandon Sane. But I think the person that's going to get you consistent points across the board is going to be Ricky Williams, because they do go to him quite often, especially to basically mix things up. I would probably go the Ricky Williams route rather than Brandon Sane, only because they have gone to him in the past and they will continue going to him in the future.
Okay, wide receiver 3, help. Brandon Marshall against Philadelphia, or Michael Crabtree at Arizona?
Brandon Marshall. Brandon Marshall is surprising a lot of people right now. Matt Moore is surprising a lot of people as well. And Brandon Marshall has developed a nice rapport with Matt Moore. With that said, I feel a lot more comfortable going against the Philadelphia defense than I would an Arizona defense at this time frame.
I also think that Crabtree's just a yo-yo ride. Most definitely. Over the last 6 games, he's had 3 games that have been 10 or more. But the only problem is those games are spread out against opponents like Cleveland. He did have 120 yards receiving against Arizona, and of course St. Louis just is completely fallen apart. 4 receptions, 96 yards, and 1 touchdown. But when it counted against Baltimore, against the Giants, he wasn't really involved with it. I don't think he's as consistent as Brandon Marshall can be, and especially like you said, Matt Moore is building a relationship with Brandon Marshall that's going to become pretty spectacular when all those pieces are just right in Miami, and they're only missing a couple now.
Right, and this team has come together under adversity, which makes this team even stronger, because when everything does start coming together, watch out, because the value is going to be tremendous. Reggie Bush is having a tremendous impact, which I never thought was ever going to happen. With that said, yeah, definitely Brandon Marshall, only because A, he's consistent, and B, he's got a good rapport, and C, Philadelphia's corners are not the strongest that they should be.
So how do you feel about Fred Davis?
How do I feel about him? Well, I feel that he's a fool.
I think that this fantasy football owner feels the exact same way that posed this question. He has him. And after a 100-yard performance, now he's absolutely beside himself because he's gone for what would be his playoffs. He's just gone. These are the top 5 tight ends that he has choices for. He's narrowed it down. It's going to be Chandler from Buffalo. He's going to be playing at San Diego. Kellen Winslow for Tampa Bay, at Jacksonville. Heath Miller for Pittsburgh. They're going to be hosting Cleveland. Dixon from Baltimore, they're going to be facing off against Indianapolis, and then you have Anthony Fasano from Miami versus Philadelphia. I like Fasano. They're kind of more the subtle kind of play. Maybe next season they're going to be in the spotlight a lot more with fantasy football owners, people that dig through teams like you and I. We see the potential in just about all these players. The second one that I like is, of course, Kellen Winslow, but the problem is with that Tampa Bay offense, he could get 4 points. The next week he might get 12, and it becomes that hit or miss kind of a deal. I think Fasano's probably the safest play right now.
I would agree with you on Fasano being a safe play because he does get his touches. I mean, he does get his cat. They do look to him. They do pass to him from time to time. Heath Miller very rarely gets more than, I'd say, 4 to 5 balls thrown his way. Although usually when he does get balls thrown his way, he's able to make some decent yardage and sometimes score touchdowns. But Heath Miller is mostly being pulled toward taking care of that offensive line. So I would actually stay away from Heath Miller. The other tight ends, Kellen Winslow, the inconsistencies with Josh Freeman. Is he going to play? Is he not going to play? The whole offense just needs to be completely restructured down there in Tampa Bay. It's not what it was supposed to be. So I'd stay away from Kellen Winslow at this time frame. Who's the other one?
Chandler.
Chandler.
From Buffalo. You also had Dixon from Baltimore.
Yeah, I would stay away from Chandler only because of Buffalo's offensive woes at this particular time frame.
Okay, here's a disclaimer, too. This is also coming from someone that has Stevie Johnson. So he's pretty sad right now, everybody that's listening. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I also had Fitzpatrick at one period of time as well. So, dropped him like a hot potato. Dixon would be an intriguing choice. But Flacco is, even if you're a Baltimore Ravens fan, you're going to express your frustrations with Joe Flacco. And Ray Rice is really the true heart of that offense. Flacco is not. Whereas if you go and look at Miami's offense, Matt Moore is the heart of that particular offense. And the rapport that he's getting with his receivers, I would actually go with Fasano rather than any of the others.
Well, Dixon, the one quality that I like about Dixon is the fact that Ray Rice is playing so strong, and there's not a lot of receiving options. Of course, Smith had a couple good games, a really great game put together from Flacco. But at the same time, his play in this last game was more useful when Baltimore had control of the offense, of the scoring, and the running game was working, so he was just purely to keep the ball moving. And if that's the case against Indianapolis and then against Cleveland again week 16, I mean, he could be. But once again, Fasano, we're in full agreement. Fasano is the more solid play out of these guys.
This was a question that was posed to me by somebody from the radio station. I've got DeMarco Murray and I've got LeGarrette Blount. Who do I play?
DeMarco Murray. It's just a simple matter of consistency. I mean, it really is. Even if we would take these last 6 weeks for LeGarrette Blount and DeMarco Murray, DeMarco Murray would still be ahead by, I believe, 5 points on average. So, and you got to go with more solid. Is this a flex spot? Is this running back 2, running back 1?
This would be a flex position. Yeah, I would have to agree with you about DeMarco Murray being he's a more consistent threat. Although the matchup against the Giants defense is very stout against the run. DeMarco Murray's numbers have been actually trending downward over the past 3 weeks. So with that said, I can understand the concern that this guy had. But on the same token, LeGarrette Blount is like a yo-yo.
Well, we could take that a step further, and we could also go between consistency, and we can even go with upside. With DeMarco Murray, you at least know that he's on an offense that will continue to score points. Des Bryant is in there now. Robinson is still gaining a lot of yardage. The running game, it might have been down last week against Arizona, and he might have had a not-so-grand performance against Miami and Washington, but he still put together receiving yards to go with that, too, in that equation. And I think that that's what Blunt is now missing, especially if Johnson plays another game instead of Josh Freeman. So, with all that being said, even consistency, upside, all of that, I still think that DeMarco Murray is going to be the solid play. Really, even if they'd be playing against San Francisco, if they'd be playing against the number one running defense, I think that you still have to put DeMarco Murray in instead of Blunt.
Yeah, I would have to say that too. I think LeGarrette Blunt, if you still have him on your roster, should only be relegated to a bench player status until we develop more consistency.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Another question that was posed to me, you can pick two receivers, one for a flex position and one is receiver 2. And the 4 options are Stevie Johnson, Antonio Brown, Torrey Smith, or Dwayne Bowe.
Well, if you'd asked me at the beginning of the year...
Boy, things change. I've worked here for about 8 weeks.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Well, the thing is, and it's not even homerism as far as Brown goes, but I think Brown has been pretty much the most consistent player out of that list. I mean, if you look at...
consistency only gets you between 7 to 10 points per game.
Yeah, but at the same time, in a standard 10 yards for reception or 10 yards per point for receiving, rushing, the last 6 weeks he's put together 4 games where he's had 10 plus points, but he hasn't found the end zone. And I think that what you're going to probably see is you're probably going to see Stevie Johnson maybe start to see the end zone a lot more than Brown. Now, that's also me arguing between who the top spot is. I mean, just out of those players, I got to go with Stevie Johnson and Brown. It's just, for me, the plus side, the consistency, even though Stevie Johnson really hasn't put together a whole bunch of games from, finding that deep trough out of these 4, I can't see Bo snapping into a streak where he's putting together 100-yard receiving games, where he's even really putting together a lot of 80-yard plus with a touchdown kind of games. But I can see that out of Stevie Johnson. I can see that out of Brown. Torrey Smith is going to be a big hit or miss. He's either going to have a blow-up game or he's going to have, 2 receptions for 48 yards.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on the Torrey Smith issue. Stevie Johnson is rather intriguing. You can say that on many different levels. Even can I ask God about Stevie Johnson? Going back to last year. No, but Stevie Johnson over the past 4 weeks, actually the past 3 weeks, has been averaging 13 points per game. And he has been seeing the end zone on a more regular basis. He has become a regular piece of the offense. And I think partially because of Fred Jackson's injury and C.J. Spiller, coming into play, they're looking for Johnson to step it up. So, and the name of the game here is consistency. So what I would actually do is I would put Stevie Johnson as wide receiver number 2 and then Antonio Brown as your flex guy. Only because, he's consistent. Every game he'll get you 7 to 10 points. But one of these days he will hit the end zone and you'll see a, 13 to 15 point game out of Antonio Brown.
Well, the other thing, too, is Stevie Johnson, when we talk about consistency, the last 2 weeks he has found the end zone, and 6 points are 6 points. I mean...
And even that fiasco that he had during the week of Thanksgiving, where, he pretended to shoot himself in the foot, he still got 13 points.
Yeah, so, once again, I think we're in definite agreement over that. Johnson and Brown are the guys that are going to be the point getters. The other guys, they might have, a 14, 15-point week, but how often can they do that? How often can their potential allow them to do that? And how often can they find the end zone in back-to-back weeks? We're going to go grab some tools. We're going to talk about the players that, in the You Got Drilled segment, we're going to talk about the players who just have simply failed this past week. Greg, who are you taking a drill to? Well, actually, I shouldn't say who are you taking a drill to. Who made you feel like taking a drill and just relieving the pressure in your head?
Well, unfortunately, I left him on the bench. But you know what? It was a tough decision, but I left him on the bench. But LeGarrette Blount. And you know what? If I played him, I would have been very, very, well, I would have lost. Let's just put it that way. I'll put it very bluntly. LeGarrette Blount, very bluntly, would have cost me the game if I had played him. This guy is not playing up to his potential. I'm tired of defending this guy. I'm tired of telling people, hold on to this guy. He'll come back around. Good players will always... this is a person that just wants to make you scream. So, yes.
Well, after a bunch of stellar weeks, in place of Darren McFadden, I got to go with Bush.
Mm-hmm.
Just, he went from out there, big running back, solid play. A lot of people, really didn't scoop him up when McFadden went down because this is, of course, Michael Bush. So, but this past week was just a letdown. And, I think this past week, actually, he was the cause for a lot of fantasy owners to either just make it in to their first game, their first week of fantasy football playoffs, or they lost their first week of fantasy football playoffs because of him.
The whole Oakland situation, traveling to Miami, just completely surprised me as to what. I honestly thought Carson Palmer was going to move that team, and actually I put Carson Palmer kind of in that mix as well as a player that I probably want to drill.
All right, now players that we want to drill, players that make us want to drill ourselves in the neck. We're going to move on from that. We're going to go with the player this week who is going to be the lockdown, the player that will absolutely dominate and help you to dominate your team. Greg, this week. Okay, so who's your hammer?
Eli Manning. This guy is tremendously consistent. His worst game, he scored 15 points in his worst game. I mean, this is a guy who, against the Saints, when they were losing horribly, still put up 29 fantasy points. This is a guy who last week put up 27 fantasy points. This is a guy who's consistent. He's going to be consistent till the season ends. If you have Eli Manning, he is an elite quarterback. You ride him to the end. He is the hammer for the New York Giants.
I absolutely think so. I mean, just the exact same way. They're going to be facing Dallas twice before the season's up. The last time that he faced off against Washington, it was early in the season. He still managed to put together, he managed to put together yardage when that team was still trying to become a cohesive unit. And now that they're rolling, two really superior games against Green Bay and New Orleans, I can only see better things against Dallas, Washington, and the Jets Week 16.
Mm-hmm.
Mine for this week, though, isn't one player. Mine for this week, are you ready?
Go ahead.
The Seattle Seahawks defense.
Intriguing.
Absolutely. And I say that because the Seattle Seahawks defense will be facing off against the greatest, most epic offensive show, a Bradfordless St. Louis offense. And I think because of that, I don't think St. Louis ain't going anywhere. Seattle, all they have to do is sit and just sit on their offense, sit on their defense, wait to pick them apart, and they definitely will. Expect them to have maybe 3, 4, maybe even 5 interceptions this whole game, a couple sacks thrown in, and I wouldn't be surprised if you not only see 1, but maybe 2 pick sixes.
Oh yeah, I would agree with you on that. I think anybody facing the hapless Rams, I think the only team that's maybe more woeful than the Rams may be the Browns, as far as offense. Of course, you have Jacksonville too, which kind of falls into that same mix as well.
But they're raising their hand in the back too, by the way.
I'm ignoring them. Because it's like the player, it's like the person up there raising their hand at every single question. I'm sorry. But no, I mean, yeah. But the Colts almost won a game. The Colts actually have some offense with Orlovsky. Okay.
Well, they have it with Orlovsky, and then you look at those running backs.
Don Brown, and no, Colts, put your hand down. I'm sorry.
But St. Louis, not so much. I mean,
No,
you would think that Jackson would be really in control of the run. He's a receiving threat, and I don't know if it was just complete bad passing, if it was lack of protection, what was going on, but that offense just is not clicking. That potential that it could have been this year, acquisition of Lloyd, Jackson still being there, Bradford maybe stepping it up and maybe progressing as a better quarterback, it just didn't happen. And now there's going to be a Monday night game. I think the Seattle defense is going to be El Fuego Monday night.
Oh, they'll be in Fuego, no doubt about it. And I'm actually going to make a prediction here as well. If St. Louis lays a golden egg, and not just any egg, but just a horrible, horrible loss, I don't expect Spagnuolo to last till the end of the season. He'll be the next coach to go.
All right, that's it for us for the Fantasy Football Toolkit. We hope that you found our inspirational humor and our information to be just everything that we feel that it is.
And more.
And more. You can check out this podcast as well as every other broadcast at both thefantasyfootballtoolkit.com and 360sportsnetwork.com. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, any rumors, any injury reports, anything at all, sits, starts, studs, duds, sleepers, keepers, deepers, if you have a cherry red 1970 Chevelle that you want to donate to me before you buckle the wheels and lie to police officers, I will take it.
Or if you are a female that was riding with the Nakama Sioux and want to tell us more about it, let us know.
I thought you were going to say that you would take it. That wouldn't have been right.
No, we'll put you on the air. We'll hear your story, and we'll verify. That's what we're all about.
Verify with pictures. You can send those to lostcause@fantasyfootballtoolkit.com. Also, be sure to check out 360sportsnetwork.com because there are a lot of articles for all the BCS followers, all the collegiate football followers, a lot of information coming out that has to do with the BCS standings, with the games, with the bowl series, because a lot of people are up in arms, especially a lot of SEC hate going on.
Mm-hmm.
But all of that hate is over at 360sportsnetwork.com. You can check out those broadcasts. There's going to be a lot to Twitter about, a lot of Twitter wars going on. You can email questions, comments, suggestions to 360 Sports Network as well at 360sportsnetwork.com. You can also follow 360 Sports Network at 3S Network. Greg, anything else you got to say?
I think that's about it. It's a wrap, and don't eat so much to look like Andy Reid.
Don't eat so much to look like Andy Reid, and if you do eat so much to look like Andy Reid, don't drive like anyone named Sue.